The world is a beautiful and diverse place, but there are certain areas that are known to be more dangerous than others. Whether it be due to war, crime, or natural disasters, these 15 locations have earned the reputation of being some of the most dangerous in the world. Number 10 on our list is Venezuela, a country plagued by political turmoil and economic collapse, which has led to widespread crime and violence. The country has been in a state of political and economic crisis for several years now, leading to shortages of basic necessities and hyperinflation. The situation has become so dire that many citizens are struggling to find food and medical supplies. The crime rate in Venezuela is also alarmingly high, with many areas considered too dangerous to visit. At number 9 is Somalia, a country that has been in a state of anarchy for decades and is currently facing a threat from terrorist group Al-Shabaab. The country has not had a functioning government since 1991. And much of the country is under the control of various warlords and militias. The country is also facing a severe drought, which has led to a humanitarian crisis. The threat of Al-Shabaab is particularly high, with the group regularly carrying out bombings and suicide attacks in major cities. Number 8 is Syria, a country that has been ravaged by civil war for over a decade, leading to millions of deaths and displacements. The conflict began in 2011 and has escalated into a brutal and complex war, with multiple parties involved. The war has caused widespread destruction, with many cities and towns left in ruins. The humanitarian situation is dire, with many people struggling to access food and medical supplies. The country is also facing a severe refugee crisis, with millions of people forced to flee their homes. Coming in at number 7 is North Korea, a secretive and authoritarian regime known for its human rights abuses and nuclear weapons program. The country is one of the most heavily sanctioned in the world, and many areas are off limits to foreigners. The regime has a long history of human rights abuses, including forced labor, torture, and execution of political dissidents. The country's nuclear weapons program is a major concern for the international community, and the risk of conflict is high. Number 6 is South Sudan, a country that has been plagued by civil war and ethnic conflict since gaining independence in 2011. The conflict has caused widespread suffering and displacement, with many people forced to flee their homes. The humanitarian situation is dire, with many people struggling to access food and medical supplies. The country is also facing a severe refugee crisis, with many people fleeing to neighboring countries. At number 5 is Mexico, a country struggling with high levels of drug-related violence and organized crime. The country has been plagued by a brutal drug war for many years, with many areas considered too dangerous to visit. The crime rate is alarmingly high, with many areas considered no-go zones for travelers. The country's security situation is highly volatile, with regular shootouts and bombings occurring in major cities. At number 4 is Iraq, a country that has been through decades of war and continues to face the threat of ISIS and other extremist groups. The country has been through a long and brutal war, with many areas left in ruins. The humanitarian situation is dire, with many people struggling to access food and medical supplies. The country is also facing a severe refugee crisis, with many people fleeing to neighboring countries. The threat of ISIS and other extremist groups is still present, and the security situation is highly volatile. Number 3 is Afghanistan, a country that has been at war for decades and continues to struggle with extremist groups like the Taliban. The ongoing conflict has caused widespread destruction and displacement of civilians. Many areas are considered to be under the control of the Taliban and other extremist groups, making it extremely dangerous for travelers. The security situation in Afghanistan is highly volatile, with regular terrorist attacks and bombings occurring in major cities. The withdrawal of foreign troops and the unstable political situation also increases the risk of violence. Number 2 is Nigeria, a country plagued by Boko Haram insurgency and ethnic and religious conflict. The country has been facing a brutal insurgency by Boko Haram for many years, which has caused widespread suffering and displacement. The humanitarian situation is dire, with many people struggling to access food and medical supplies. The country is also facing a severe refugee crisis, with many people fleeing to neighboring countries. The security situation is highly volatile, with many areas considered to be no-go zones for travelers. And the number one most dangerous location in the world is Yemen, a country torn apart by civil war and facing a humanitarian crisis, with many areas controlled by militant groups. The country has been in a state of war since 2015 and has been facing a humanitarian catastrophe with many people on the brink of starvation. The conflict has also led to a breakdown of essential services and a cholera outbreak. The country is in a state of chaos, with many areas controlled by various warring factions and the risk of kidnappings, bombings, airstrikes, and landmines. The humanitarian situation is dire, with many people struggling to access food and medical supplies. The risk of death from starvation, disease, and violence is very high. While these locations may be dangerous, it's important to remember that there are still people living and working in these areas, and they deserve our support and attention. Always be cautious and aware when traveling to these or any other potentially dangerous areas.